Hello everybody. Today we've got a cool project we're going to start. We are going to make a 2-foot by 4-foot coffee table, but it's going to be something you've never seen before. It's going to be one of our coolest projects to date. Let's get started. Now this resin top is going to sit in a metal frame. We're going to use 1-inch angle iron and tubing, 1-inch tubing to make legs. We're going to do all that in-house. It's going to be pretty cool. But the focus we want to be on the tabletop, because what we're going to do is put a nice cool silver gray layer on the bottom. Then we're going to spread all these cool watch parts all over it in a cool arrangement. And then we're going to do a tinted clear coat over the top, and that'll give it a really cool look. It'll be very unique. It's a cool way to use up all these great parts and make something really unique. We're going to need our resin. We're going to use an epoxy resin called Liquid Diamonds for this one. We're going to use a silver gray mica for the base layer. This project is going to take a lot of resin. By my calculation, a 2 by 4 by 1.5 inch thick cast is going to take about 9 gallons of resin, which is a lot of resin. So I want to make sure and do this right. How I figured that is if you take length by width by depth and times that by 0.55, it gives you a volume of resin. With a cast this big, it's important to make sure that everything is level. So before I set up here, I made sure my table was level, and I just want to make sure that I'm sitting level as far as the mold goes. If this was off even just a couple of millimeters, at this length, one end would be way thicker than the other, and it wouldn't look right. Plus, it'd be darker on one end because it'd be a thicker material with my gray than the other. So it's very important to be level. This is an HDPE mold. I'm not going to use mold release. That is at the advice of a friend who does a lot of big casts. His name is Bob at Unique Wood Supply. Shout out to Bob. Actually, that's where I got this mold. The angles have the ends have a slight angle to them. That's so you can flip it over and actually pop it out a little easier than if it was straight up and down. Okay, so we're going to do the first pour. This is the base layer. This is going to have to sit probably a good 24 hours. So I want to get this going. The downside of these big pours is it ties up your casting area. If you have a small area like me, this thing takes up my whole table. Plus, I want to keep it dust-free and dirt-free while it's curing. So I'm going to close the door, not have anyone come in here, and it's going to hopefully keep it clean. Now, I need approximately 1 gallon to cover the base of this, if my math was correct. Now, I am not a big pour guy. Typically, I make pen blanks, handle blanks, knife scale blanks. So this is a unique thing for me to do a giant table. This will start to heat up fairly quickly because of the volume. So when it's in a small container like this, it's going to heat up a lot quicker. If it was spread out right away, that would slow the curing process. This is a thermal cure. It's a thermal reaction. The two parts generate heat, and that's what cures it. So this is a lot of resin. I'm going to need a lot of mica. I'm going to use this aluminum dowel. It's the best thing I have for a stir stick. I don't like to just go buy something. I try to use what I've got. In this case, it'll work. Now, epoxies are very sensitive to stirring. You can certainly under-stir an epoxy. So I stir epoxies at least 3 to 5 minutes. I've heard of people having to wait weeks for something to fully cure because the mix wasn't quite right, either the ratio or the stirring wasn't well done, and it just isn't good. So make sure you stir it. You can't over stir it, but you can definitely under stir it. I think I got enough. Well, I can kind of see the writing on the thing there, so I'm going to add a little more mica. And I'm not super concerned with time and temperature here. A lot of times I am because I'm mixing swirls or colors. 71 degrees. So that's my base temperature. When I do swirls with liquid diamonds or epoxies, I wait till over 100 degrees. But because we're just pouring one color on the base, we don't have to wait. We can just mix it up and pour it and let her sit. So I'm still a little shy of a gallon. Gallon's 128. We'll pour this and see how it looks. We may need a third pour of about the same size to get up to a gallon. But we'll just see how the coverage is. The idea is that I want a thin, darker base layer so that way our watches stand out on top of it. I have cleaned off the mold several times to try to get any debris and dirt out of it. You want to make sure it's really, really clean because you don't want any imperfections in your resin. All right, let's do it. So when you pour stuff like this, you can obviously see there's cool lines and rings from the pouring, but that's all going to change. If we leave the camera on here very long, we'll see that it's going to change and move and all kinds of stuff while it's setting. But you can also make patterns right before it starts to set using sticks and things. So I haven't decided if I want to do that or not, but I'm going to go ahead and mix up more resin because we clearly need it. It's kind of settled a little bit. It's coating very slowly, the tension of the resin as it moves, but it's closing up, you can see on that area. But I definitely don't have enough. When you're doing big casts like this, you have to be very careful of thickness. Not all resins are meant to be cast thick. This particular one, I wouldn't want to go over like 3/4 of an inch. Because this is going to be so spread out, it's going to help with my heat dissipation. If I poured the same amount of resin, but it was thicker, like in a smaller square, I would have to be really careful because it would overheat really easily. And we call that thermal runaway. And the resin will actually look like it's boiling because it's getting hotter and hotter, and the heat that it's building on itself then sets it off faster, and it almost looks like it's boiling. It's kind of a scary thing, but it does happen. So make sure whatever resin you're using, you're following the rules. Get some advice on how much to pour at a time, how thick you can pour at a time. There's all kinds of different types of resins, so you want to make sure and use the right one. Now, what's good about epoxy, the reason we use it for a cast like this, is we have a lot of open time, and there's a couple of times you want to know about. So there's pot time, how long you have in the pot when you're mixing it up to work with it. This one is about 20 to 30 minutes. Now, I'm not waiting that 20 to 30 minutes because I don't need to, but that's my pot time. Then my set time is how long it takes for the resin in the mold to set, meaning harden up or firm up. And then demold time is how long you need to wait before you actually take it out of the mold. And that's when it's going to be fairly hard at that point. And then full cure time. Full cure time is the amount of time you want to wait before you actually work with it. So in this case, we got about 20 to 30 minutes of pot time. We probably got 8 hours of set time before this sets and starts to feel firm. We're probably going to do about 24 to 48 hours before we demold this. That's after all the layers, not just this first one. And then for this project, we're probably going to give it at least 5 days before we do any sanding, trimming, any of that, because we want this thing to fully harden up because we want it to polish and look really good when we're done. I'm going to pour this last jug in here. That is cool looking for sure, but obviously we wouldn't want that to be our whole table because it's not very even. And obviously you can see down here there's no resin yet, but it's flowing that direction. And even when I'm dripping the drops here, we don't want this, like that look of just single drops. You can kind of even things out by just making cool swipes. And you can see I'm stirring up that mica that's kind of found a way wherever it is. And this will level out on its own. So what I'm doing here won't stay either because I'm too far away from the set time. So if I wanted this to stay like this, I would have to do this right at the end. But I'll keep an eye on this, and before the set time, I'll take a look at it and see if we need to tweak anything. And then we are gonna let this set at least 24 hours before we come back with the watches and put them on, which is gonna be the fun part, so stick around. Well, here we are for the final pour of this coffee table. You can see our watch parts look really cool. We did all the watches and then we sprinkled in some parts to just add a little bit of look and dimension. And today we're going to do the top coat. Now I've mixed up 2 small batches of liquid diamonds. These are 40 ounces each. And we're gonna tint this gray. We could do clear, but I think clear might be too much. Like it might be too, I don't know, clear. So I'm gonna barely tint it gray, and I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna use this Divine Pigments gray, and I'm gonna put in not even a drop. Basically, I'm gonna kind of just give it a squirt here and touch it to my stick. And this will dissipate in here a lot. And it'll give it just the little bit of color we want without coloring it. If we put even just a full drop in there, it would probably be too dark. So this, it's almost not noticeable, but it'll help give it that tint. The reason I'm tinting it is, one, I think the clear might not, it might be too much, the clear, but also resins over long term can yellow, and by adding a little bit of tint, it'll help stop or prevent that yellowing by giving it a different color. All resins, no matter what they say, will yellow over time because they continue to cure as time goes on, even though they're hard. It's kind of a weird thing how it works. Even yellow inhibiting resins will eventually yellow. So if you can add a little tint and it helps the look of your project, it'll also help the look of your yellowing and your all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix some of these together. And on this, I'm gonna pour just enough to go over the watches, but not a lot of extra because this is a big piece and I don't want to add a ton of extra weight or burn up a ton of extra resin. And it's funny because it looks like a lot of resin until you start pouring it into something this big, and then it doesn't look like much at all. So I'm going to do 1 bubble popping on this. I've let it sit a little bit. Most of the bigger bubbles and small bubbles have risen to the surface. I'm going to do 1 really quickly. I don't recommend going back and forth over and over because what you do is you cure the surface and then the bubbles that are still coming up get trapped. So I like to wait a while, then do the bubble popping. Match up without overlapping a lot. You can see how much clearer that looks once the micro bubbles are popped. Make sure I didn't miss anything. All right, and now we wait. So we went back and sanded this and it did not work. So we talked to Bob over at Unique Wood Supply and he told us just to do a flood top coat, which is what we did. And it came out pretty good. There's a couple little things I don't love about it, but overall for a kind of a table on a whim to use up all these watches, it looks pretty cool. So a watch lover or somebody who needs something like this, this is kind of a one of a kind. We even made a frame. So it is done and ready to go. You want to do a thumbnail? Don't get any slobber on the table. Oh, gross. Sit, sit. Dexter, sit, sit. Now pose. Good boy. Oh, you got slobber on the table, dude. Okay, ready? Pose.